Welcome to the deep dive. We cut through the noise to get you straight to the insights. Okay, picture this. September 12th, 2001. U.S. airspace. Totally shut down. Everything grounded. People are stranded everywhere. There's even a guy waiting for a heart transplant, his new organ just 80 miles away, but he can't get there. Yet somehow, amidst all this paralysis, private jets get clearance to fly. And who's on them? Members of the Saudi royal family. Even relatives of Osama bin Laden flying out of the U.S. How on earth could that happen? All right, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into something that honestly sounds like a spy thriller. It's the decades-long, often very secret relationship between the Bush family, the House of Bush, and the Saudi royal family, the House of Saud. We're going to explore how these two, incredibly powerful dynasties got so tangled up, how they shaped geopolitics, global money flows, and even the landscape of terrorism.
It's a fascinating story, and it wasn't overnight. It really evolved over decades, from a kind of formal alliance to something much deeper, almost familial. Our main guide here is Craig Unger's book, House of Bush, House of Saud. It's incredibly well-researched. Unger pulls together all these scattered reports, puts them into a narrative that's, frankly, pretty chilling. It definitely makes you look at U.S. foreign policy in a different light.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to untangle this web, the personal friendships, the business deals, the political maneuvering that define this secret relationship, as Unger calls it. We want to help you understand the huge implications, especially around 9/11, basically give you the shortcut to grasping this really complex, controversial story. Okay, so where does this all begin, this unprecedented connection, the official U.S.-Saudi relationship? That kicks off back in 1945, right? FDR meets King Abdulaziz on a warship, the USS Quincy. That's the start of the famous oil for security deal. Oil for the U.S., protection for the Saudis. But how did that formal pact morph into this, deep personal thing between these two specific families?
Well, things really pick up speed in the mid-'70s. That's when you get the Houston-Jeddah connection. There's this guy, James Bath, Houston airplane broker, flew with George W. Bush in the Air National Guard. He gets a call. It's Salem bin Laden, Osama's older half-brother, heir to the huge Saudi bin Laden construction fortune. Salem wants to buy a plane? Seems simple, right? But it kicks off something much bigger.
Yeah, it wasn't just one plane, was it? Salem and this other key figure, Khalid bin Mahfouz, he was a billionaire Saudi banker, later the biggest shareholder in that infamous bank, BCCI.
Right.
They start coming to Houston all the time. Bath kind of shows them the ropes, the ways of the West. They're buying planes, construction gear, houses in Texas, Florida.
And you've got to remember the context. This is after the '73 oil embargo. U.S. oil production had peaked, demand was soaring, gas prices were through the roof, inflation. But all that money flowing out for oil meant massive wealth flowing into Saudi Arabia. Petrodollars.
Ah, the petrodollars.
Exactly. And Houston became a major hub for that money. Unger says over 80 Houston companies built strong Saudi ties. People were saying Houston was becoming like another home for the Saudis. It really reshaped the city's economy and its global connections.
So you've got the Saudis, suddenly incredibly wealthy, but as the book puts it, a feudal desert monarchy. Militarily weak, they need protection, and the U.S. needs the oil. How do the Bushes fit into this picture? They had their own background in oil and politics.
Oh, perfectly positioned. George H.W. Bush, Bush Sr., he'd gone from, the East Coast elite to the Texas oil boom back in '48. He understood oil as a strategic, vital resource. Then he sells his oil company stake, pursues politics, rises fast, UN ambassador, RNC chair, CIA director. He's building this incredible network.
And James Baker III was key too, right? His political partner.
Absolutely. His perfect partner, Unger calls him Baker, the consummate negotiator. And Baker had deep ties to Texas Commerce Bank, which, interestingly, built a huge skyscraper with help from, guess who?
Khalid bin Mahfouz.
Khalid bin Mahfouz. It's all interconnected.
It really is an incredible mix of personal ties, business, and high-level politics. Unger describes it as unprecedented. Think about it. A U.S. president, then another president from the same family, having such close personal and financial links to the rulers of another country.
Yeah, especially a country like Saudi Arabia. We're talking unbelievable wealth, military power, the world's biggest energy reserves.
It was apparently an open secret, but the full picture was hard to discern. It definitely set the stage for some shadier dealings down the line. And those deep connections, they started enabling some really covert stuff, didn't they?
Yeah.
Often with, massive unintended consequences. Let's talk about BCCI.
Ah, yes, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International.
What was this bank? Why is it so important here?
Well, BCCI was founded by a Pakistani guy, Aga Hassan Abedi. In the '70s, it was the fastest growing bank in the world. perfectly positioned, like you said, for those Middle East petrodollars. But Unger argues it quickly became effectively a Saudi operation. Big investors were Saudi intelligence chiefs like Kamal Adam, Gaith Farron. But here's the crucial part. BCCI wasn't just a bank. It was more like a shadow financial network. It offered services you couldn't get elsewhere, like phony documentation for illegal arms deals.
Wow.
It became the bank the CIA used for covert ops. But also, crucially, Saddam Hussein used it, and terrorist groups. One U.S. investigator literally called BCCI the mother and father of terrorist financing operations.
And Mahfouz, the banker friend of Salem bin Laden.
Khalid bin Mahfouz became its biggest shareholder, poured nearly $1 billion into it.
And it wasn't just about moving money, it was about buying influence, right?
Right.
There's that story about Burt Lance, Carter's budget director.
Yeah, that's a stark example. Lance sells his bank stock to Gaith Farron for, like, double its value. And the book states the explicit purpose was gaining access to President Carter in the White House. It shows how money could directly translate into political access.
This idea of bypassing normal channels, it even pulled the Saudis directly into U.S. covert ops, like Iran-Contra.
Right, Iran-Contra, huge scandal. The Reagan-Bush administration secretly sells arms to Iran.
Which was supposed to be an enemy.
Exactly. And then they take the profits to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua, fighting the leftist government there. All of this completely against a direct congressional ban. So how did they get the money to the Contras without Congress knowing?
They turned to their friends.
They turned to the Saudis. National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane goes to Prince Bandar, the Saudi ambassador.
And the Saudis chip in.
Big time. $1 million a month initially, ends up being about $52 million for the Contras.
Wow. What did the Saudis get in return for that kind of favor?
The payoff. 400 Stinger missiles. Top-of-the-line, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, lethal stuff. Reagan used emergency powers to push the sale through, bypassing Congress again, even though the House had voted 411-0 against exactly that kind of transfer earlier. It just shows the lengths they'd go to for this relationship.
That makes you wonder about the long-term file-out of these kinds of deals.
Sure.
Like supporting Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, that's another really uncomfortable part of the story. The U.S. later fought 2 wars against him, but according to Unger, Saddam had early ties to the CIA. Back in 1959, apparently hired as a 22-year-old assassin. For years, the CIA saw him as, quote, their SUG, useful against the Soviets. In '63, the book claims CIA officers in Baghdad even gave Saddam lists of communists to, well, eliminate.
That's chilling. And even later, when he was known to be using chemical weapons.
Right. December 1983. Iraq is using chemical weapons almost daily against Iran. Who goes to meet Saddam to normalize relations? Donald Rumsfeld as Reagan's special envoy?
Rumsfeld later said he warned Saddam about the chemical weapons.
He did. But Unger points to a declassified memo from that meeting that contradicts Rumsfeld. It apparently shows no mention of chemical weapons at all. It suggests a willingness to overlook atrocities for strategic goals.
And Vice President Bush, George H.W., he was right in the middle of all this Middle East policy.
Deeply involved. Unger describes him as good at diplomacy, but also easily swayed by personal relationships. A real player in this complex game. He even personally lobbied the Export-Import Bank to give loan guarantees for an Iraqi oil pipeline.
Even though Iraq was using chemical weapons and wasn't considered creditworthy.
Yep. Why?
Why?
Because the bank chairman, William Draper, was an old friend and Bush campaign co-chair. Personal ties trumping policy concerns. By 1989, thanks in part to over $5 billion in U.S. loan guarantees under Reagan and Bush Sr., Saddam had built Iraq into the region's strongest military, complete with chemical and budding nuclear programs.
So he essentially helped build up a future enemy.
That's certainly the implication drawn in the book, short-term goals creating long-term threats.
And that pattern seems to repeat with the funding of the Afghan Mujahideen.
Absolutely. The U.S. and Saudis team up to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, pour money and weapons into the anti-Soviet rebels, the Mujahideen. In Saudi Arabia, this was huge. Unger says it had a monumental footprint, supported by everyone from royals to hardline clerics. And who gets involved? Osama bin Laden.
Right, he was outraged by the Soviet invasion.
Go straight there. Brings construction equipment from his family's company, the Saudi Bin Laden Group.
And he starts organizing.
He co-founds Maktab al-Khidamat, the MAK Services Bureau. It's basically the precursor to al-Qaeda. His partner is Abdullah Azzam, a radical cleric who'd been one of Osama's university professors. The MAK sets up recruiting offices in like 50 countries, including the U.S. recruiting thousands of warriors.
And the U.S. government knew about MAK.
According to the source, yes. Vice President Bush supported funneling aid through MA. Prince Bandar even recalled Osama bin Laden thanking the Saudis and Americans for helping the Mujahideen kick out the Soviets. It's hindsight, but Unger frames it as essentially hiring a terrorist to fight terrorism.
But the Mujahideen, including bin Laden, they weren't fighting for American Cold War goals, were they?
Not at all. Unger writes that neither the U.S. nor the Saudis seemed to mind that the crusading young Muslims could not have cared less about helping America win the Cold War. Osama's own brother apparently said later that Osama's views were forged by fighting a non-Islamic superpower. The brutality of the Soviet war seemed to change him completely.
So the very alliance meant to fight one enemy inadvertently nurtured the seeds of another.
That's the tragic irony laid out in the book. These covert alliances had blowback, massive blowback.
And underlying all this was this fundamental contradiction within Saudi Arabia itself.
Yeah, the double marriage, as Unger puts it. The House of Saud's power, its legitimacy, comes from its alliance with Wahhabism. That's a very strict, puritanical form of Sunni Islam. It shapes everything in the kingdom.
But they also desperately needed their alliance with the West, particularly the U.S., for security and technology.
Exactly. So they had these vital relationships with two partners, the U.S. and the Wahhabi establishment, who were essentially mortal enemies. They wanted to modernize, but maybe not necessarily westernize. It created this intense internal tension.
And this tension was fueled by the royals' own behavior, right? The contrast between the required piety and their actual lifestyle.
Oh, absolutely. The book details incredible excess. King Fahd supposedly married 100 women, built a $3 billion palace, gambled away millions. Prince Bandar himself is quoted acknowledging massive corruption, maybe $50 billion, misused. But his attitude was kind of, so what? We didn't invent corruption.
Wow.
NSA intercepts apparently confirmed royals skimming billions from state projects, even mosque renovations. This hypocrisy wasn't lost on the religious extremists within the kingdom. It fueled their anger.
And this delicate balancing act, this double marriage, it really snapped during the first Gulf War.
That was the breaking point, especially for bin Laden. Iraq invades Kuwait. King Fahd agrees to let U.S. troops onto Saudi soil, the land of Mecca and Medina.
Sacred ground.
Sacred ground. For bin Laden, this was a back-breaking calamity. It made the double marriage totally explicit, undeniable. The alliance with the infidel West was now boots on the ground. Even Saudi clerics initially refused to endorse it. It called the House of Saud's Islamic legitimacy into question.
And bin Laden's reaction.
Pure fury. Unger documents how he called the U.S. presence a humiliation of Islam, an unforgivable sin, a crusader attack. He declared the holy sites were now under non-Muslim control for the first time in centuries. He called for boycotts of U.S. goods, saying U.S. tax dollars funded Israel. This event fundamentally shifted his target. His primary enemy became the far enemy, the U.S. and the Saudi regime she now saw as its puppet.
And al-Qaeda didn't wait long to strike inside the U.S., did they? Even before the Gulf War was over.
That's a crucial point often missed. November 1990, U.S. troops are just landing in Saudi Arabia. In New York City, Rabbi Meir Kahan, a really controversial militant Zionist, is assassinated.
I remember that. The shooter was caught.
El-Sayed Nosair. The FBI insisted he acted alone. But here's the kicker, according to Unger. They didn't properly search his files. Those files contained a sermon talking about blowing up New York landmarks, specifically mentioning the World Trade Center. And they found one of the very first documents ever seen with the name al-Qaeda on it.
Wow, so that assassination.
Unger presents it as al-Qaeda's first casualty on American soil, a massive missed signal, an intelligence failure years before 9/11.
So after the Gulf War, bin Laden becomes persona non grata in Saudi Arabia.
Increasingly so. He leaves, first for Pakistan, then Sudan in 1991. He starts setting up businesses, front companies, specifically to fund his growing terror network. And the attacks escalate. Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia in 96 kills U.S. servicemen. The 98 embassy bombings in East Africa kill hundreds, including Americans. Bin Laden is redefining terrorism stateless, running huge training camps, trying to get chemical, even nuclear weapons.
And what's the Saudi bin Laden group, Osama's family's company, doing during all this?
Here's a really jarring detail from the book. The bin Laden family actually profited from the attacks. After Khobar Towers, the House of Saud gave the Saudi bin Laden group a $150 million contract to rebuild the damaged facility.
That seems problematic.
To say the least.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Clinton administration tries to investigate Saudi links to terrorism financing. But Unger claims the Saudis stonewalled, preferring their longtime American friends, the House of Bush. They declined to press any charges whatsoever against bin Laden.
And the money kept flowing. Through charities.
Yeah, the book details how Saudi-backed charities had funneled tens of millions to bin Laden's network, the so-called Afghan Arabs, during the Soviet War. As al-Qaeda grew, Osama basically hijacked countless millions from these same charitable networks to fund his terror operations. Whenever U.S. officials tried to trace the money, the Saudis would apparently say they needed more information or just hadn't found anything, a pattern of looking the other way, perhaps.
Then comes 2000, the Bush restoration. George W. Bush is running for president. And the family ties continue, especially through business.
Very much so. Bush Sr., after leaving office, became a senior advisor to the Carlyle Group. The book calls Carlyle the most prominent outpost for Bush and his allies in the private sector.
A private equity firm, right? Huge defense contracts.
Exactly. And Unger states this is where the House of Saud and the House of Bush really did business. Wealthy Saudis, including members of the bin Laden family and Khalid bin Mahfouz's sons, poured money into Carlyle funds. This investment, the book suggests, helped Carlyle's defense companies win lucrative contracts back in Saudi Arabia. It's a revolving door of money and influence.
And the 2000 election campaign itself had a specific Saudi angle, the Arabian candidate strategy.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Campaign strategists like Grover Norquist actively courted Muslim American voters. How? By building alliances with certain community groups, some of which, according to Unger, were run by Wahhabi Islamic fundamentalists. The idea was to create a Wahhabi lobby, similar to influential Jewish lobbying groups.
And Saudi money was involved there, too.
Unger cites figures suggesting Saudis provided at least $324 million to mosques and Islamic groups in the U.S., with maybe 80% of mosques coming under Wahhabi control. It raises serious questions about foreign influence in domestic U.S. religious and political life.
Some of these alliances were pretty controversial, weren't they?
Extremely. Bush campaigned alongside Sami al-Arian, a Florida professor who was later arrested and pleaded guilty to charges related to financing Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And remember, Talad Othman. He was a Saudi investor linked to Bush's old, struggling oil company, Harkin Energy, also tied to Abdullah Tahabash, another BCCI figure.
Right.
Othman actually gave a Muslim benediction at the Republican National Convention in 2000. Symbolic moment for this strategy.
And this outreach, particularly in Florida.
The book argues the Muslim vote was crucial, even decisive in Florida, helping Bush win that incredibly close 2000 election. Those alliances paid off politically.
Okay, so all these threads, the deep financial ties, the political alliances, the blind spots, the rise of al-Qaeda, they all seem to be converging as we head into 2001.
Tragically, yes. And the warnings were getting louder. July 2001. Richard Clarke, the counterterrorism czar, holds this urgent meeting. Federal agencies all there. He warns them point blank. Something really spectacular is going to happen here, and it's going to happen soon.
Did he have a plan?
He did. A detailed, multifaceted plan to go after al-Qaeda. But according to Unger, it had been sitting on Bush's desk and remained unimplemented.
And other things were making it easier for terrorists, not harder. That Visa Express program.
Yeah, in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. Embassy started it for convenience. Saudis could get U.S. visas without an in-person interview. An official quoted in the book called it an open-door policy for terrorists. 3 of the 9/11 hijackers used it.
And there were warnings from within the FBI, too.
An agent in Phoenix sent a memo. He noticed suspected Islamic militants taking flight lessons, asking weird questions about airport security. He proposed monitoring flight schools nationwide. It got shut down. Concerns about racial profiling, apparently.
And the money connections persisted, right up to the hijackers themselves.
Disturbingly so. There's this figure, Omar al-Bayoumi, alleged al-Qaeda ties. He was getting payments from Princess Haifa.
Prince Bandar's wife.
Yeah.
Saudi ambassador's wife.
That's the one. Al-Bayoumi befriends 2 future 9/11 hijackers, Khalid al-Manhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, when they arrive in California. He even helps pay their rent. Now, Unger is careful to say there's no evidence that Princess Haifa or Prince Bandar knew they might be indirectly funding al-Qaeda, but the fact remains money originating from the Saudi embassy, via the ambassador's wife, indirectly ended up in the hands of the hijackers. It shows how compromised the system was.
Then there's the famous August 6th PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefing.
Right. Titled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in the U.S. Some accounts say it was more general, but others cited by Unger insisted explicitly said that bin Laden's followers might hijack U.S. airliners.
And the president's reaction.
Bush was on vacation at his ranch in Crawford, Texas. He received the briefing. According to reports cited in the book, he spent the rest of the day fishing. and had no further meetings specifically on terrorism for the next 30 days, right up until 9/11.
And then, September 11th happens. As the towers fall, President Bush is famously reading to school children in Florida. There's another connection mentioned in the book involving his brother, Marvin.
Yeah, Marvin Bush. He owned stock and was on the board of a company called StratSec. StratSec handled security for three key 9/11 targets: United Airlines, Dulles Airport, and the World Trade Center itself.
He left the board before 9/11, I believe.
Correct. But for critics cited by Unger, it's another one of those connections that raises uncomfortable questions, given the context.
But the most stunning event in the immediate aftermath, going back to our intro, was that evacuation.
The Great Escape, as Unger calls it. While every other plane in America is grounded, a massive and elaborate operation gets underway to fly Saudis out of the country.
Private jets. Lear jets from Tampa to Kentucky carrying royals. A big customized DC-8 flying Saudis with diplomatic passports from Vegas to Geneva.
Another luxury Boeing 727 master bedroom, big screen TV. The works flies Prince Ahmed bin Salman, King Fahd's nephew, from Kentucky to London. It's extraordinary.
And members of the bin Laden family were on these flights too.
Yes. Flown from LA with a stop in Orlando, then eventually to Washington before leaving the U.S. There's an anecdote in the book about a flight attendant overhearing one passenger talking about Osama bin Laden saying, "Yeah, but he was my brother."
Were these people interrogated before they left, given that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi?
That's the shocking part. According to Unger, citing officials, the FBI had no role in facilitating these flights, and crucially, nobody was interrogated on many of them. The book frames it as the Bush administration actively choosing to protect a foreign government, the Saudis, over potentially crucial investigation in the immediate aftermath of the attacks.
The questions didn't stop there. There were allegations from captured al-Qaeda members, Abu Zubaydah.
Right. Abu Zubaydah, a high-level al-Qaeda figure captured in Pakistan. Under interrogation, reportedly involving truth serum and sleep deprivation, he made some explosive claims. He alleged there was a deal. The Saudi royal family would secretly aid the Taliban and al-Qaeda as long as al-Qaeda kept its terrorism out of Saudi Arabia.
A quid pro quo.
That's what he claimed. And he specifically named Prince Ahmed bin Salman, the same prince flown out on that luxury jet, as an intermediary in this deal.
And what happened to Prince Ahmed?
Shortly after the Saudis were reportedly informed about Zubaydah's allegations, Prince Ahmed, age 43, died suddenly, officially a heart attack. Unger presents it as a deeply suspicious coincidence.
And this pattern of potential suppression, it continued with the official 9/11 report.
The 28 pages, that refers to a section of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, specifically dealing with Saudi connections to the hijackers and potential funding. The Bush administration classified those 28 pages, refused to release them to the public for years.
Senator Bob Graham, who co-chaired that inquiry, was furious.
He's quoted saying bluntly, "They are protecting a foreign government."
It took until 2016 for those pages to be largely declassified.
Yeah.
And Michael Moore's documentary, Fahrenheit 9/11.
Which drew heavily on Unger's book. It became the highest-grossing documentary ever at the time. It forced these questions: the Saudi evacuation, the financial ties, the alleged $1.4 billion in Saudi funds flowing to Bush-linked businesses into the mainstream public consciousness in a way official channels hadn't.
So where did this leave the U.S.-Saudi relationship after 9/11? Things seemed to shift, didn't they? The focus moved to Iraq.
Yeah, the post-9/11 period saw the rise of the neoconservatives within the Bush administration pushing for the Iraq War. Suddenly, some figures who previously courted the Saudis were framing Saudi Arabia itself as a major problem. A Rand Corporation analyst quoted by Unger even called the kingdom a kernel of evil.
A major pivot.
A huge pivot. The U.S. even pulled most of its combat troops out of Saudi Arabia in 2003, partly, Unger suggests, to ease domestic pressure on the Saudi regime from militants who hated the U.S. presence. But the underlying instability remained. Terrorist attacks continued inside Saudi Arabia, and that core oil for security bargain. With global oil demand rising and Saudi Arabia still controlling a quarter of the world's known reserves, Unger concludes that the steady supply of oil America depended on was left more vulnerable than ever to the unpredictable forces of Islamic fundamentalism that the relationship itself had, in part, helped to unleash.
So wrapping this all up, What does this deep dive tell us? We followed this story over decades. Early oil deals, close family friendships, secret back channels, funding proxy wars, the rise of al-Qaeda, the shock of 9/11, the controversial aftermath. What really emerges is this picture of incredibly entangled interests, strategic goals mixed with personal loyalties, leading to some really troubling compromises.
Yeah, this relationship between the House of Bush and the House of Saud, it started for mutual benefit oil, security, anti-communism. But it spun into this complex, often hidden web. And as Unger lays it out, had these profound, often devastating, unforeseen consequences, playing out just beneath the surface of public view.
The book really highlights how pursuing national interest, or what's perceived as national interest, can lead you into alliances with forces that are fundamentally opposed to your values. How you can inadvertently create the conditions for future enemies to emerge.
Absolutely. And it underscores the immense power of personal relationships in global politics and high finance, how those connections can sometimes bypass normal checks and balances, bypass accountability, often with really serious results down the line.
So, this exploration of Unger's work, it reveals how hidden agendas, these deliberately complex corporate and political ties, can fundamentally shape world events. It leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. How many other elephants in the living room like this might exist in international relations, shaping our reality from behind closed doors? And what could happen if or when those hidden connections finally come to light?